in some strange sense, the notion of a greater, a more egalitarian society is inherent in the Christian and Judeo-Christian traditions. I think it's Acts 2 tells people to give up their wealth and join together in a common community. I worked with the steelworkers in Youngstown, and was supported by one of the big steel companies went down in the late 70s. And there was a religious coalition led by the bishop there, the Catholic bishop and an Episcopal bishop and all of the religious leaders. And the notion was that the community and workers as a whole ought to benefit from this particular company and set it back up and get it going again. But it went right back to themes that you could find in the early Bible. In some sense, I've seen a study recently that suggests that Karl Marx was only really translating those communal visions and those equitable visions into Marxist language. I think that overdoes it a little bit, but you find themes of equality and equity in all the great religions. So you start there. You find the Diggers or some of the early British and English fights in the 16th and 17th century over who should own the land, and the ownership of the commons was a theme that came up there. And importantly, the notion that there ought to be some sort of communal form. The commons is language that was used now increasingly to talk about this. Who should benefit from the wealth of the earth, God's creation, as they put it in those terms. The secular versions of this you find them particularly in the 19th century. Socialism as a term did not start with Marxism. It's well earlier than that. And the notion of socialism as a state-controlled, centralized Stalinist bureaucracy was one tangential idea about these ideas that, as I say, essentially come out of the notion of the commons and community and in some sense religious. Many other ways of formulating that general idea were common. The notion of community as cooperatives was another way to do it, in highly decentralized form. And you find many different people writing in the 19th century about this. Anarchist forms of it. Anarchism is often used as a dirty word, but it really meant against the state. You'd find people in the Tea Party who in some sense are anarchists because they think excessive state power is something that ought to be opposed. I think modern democratic socialists are very strongly worried about the state because they've seen what can happen in socialism without a radically decentralized base. So you don't find many modern socialists talking about the way they're caricatured as the government controlling everything. Modern socialists, by and large, are talking about a very different vision, which starts at the bottom and works its way up, tries to use state power to manage things in a way that's more equitable, but beginning at the bottom, from the bottom up, is really one of the themes you see coming up in what some people are calling 21st century socialism. But Owen was one of the original. Proudhon, Owen, and Saint-Simon were the three major characters in 19th century development of these ideas. And they attempting also intentional communities, the setting up of collective communities in the United States, which is a really interesting thing to look at in terms of the theme of cooperatively owned communities, but also the notion of intentional communities without the development of a democratic politics, in my view, was always a mistake. So it did not have a political theory of what it was doing, and indeed they collapsed. Virtually all the major attempts at intentional cooperative communities failed. The most recent one that failed or is in great trouble is the Israeli kibbutz. The Israeli kibbutz, which really means just a cooperative community, and there have been, a large number of them were highly successful, and many still are successful, but they've really fallen down as a major share of Israeli society, though they were very important at one point.